Hello there my ghosty ghouls and goblins, this is a Halloween and Samhain Q&A. I asked you guys over on Instagram if you wouldn't mind being angelic demons and giving me some questions that I could answer for this seasonal Q&A. I have got on the go a vodka and coke. Not seasonal, more of an all-round beverage I feel, although the colour is seasonal as fuck. And I'm going to go through my Instagram comments on this post. I'm not going to be able to get to all of them because there were tons. Thank you so much to everybody who asked me a question. I'm just going to scroll through and take a look at questions that I don't think I've answered before, questions that take my fancy, seasonal kinds of questions, all that kind of jazz. So I'm going to get into it as of now, darling. Let's have a look and see what we can see. Oh my God, it used to be so easy for me to wear these fingers when I was little because I would wear them all the time. I would not wait for Halloween to wear these witchy fingers. I would put them on constantly and pretend I was the witch from the Wicked Witch of the West from Wizard of Oz. And I used to run around my nana's house and go, "I'll get you, my pretty, and your little dog too." But it's been a while since I wore them on a regular basis. I must admit I still maybe sometimes pull them out when it's not Halloween, but they're much harder to get to grips with now. So let's see how we do. Instagram. Okay, so the very first question that catches my eye is not necessarily sort of seasonal in nature, but it's a question that I really want to answer because it means that I can plug my friend's amazing work and I can get you guys to go over to her Instagram and have a look at the collaboration that we've been doing for the month of October. So this person is asking, are there any particular artists that you would love to see create oracle decks? And my answer to that would be that I would love to see my friend Jenny Lloyd make any kind of fucking deck. And that would be amazing. So basically during the month of October, as many of you guys probably know, it is Inktober over on Instagram, which is the sort of challenge that artists have to produce a piece of work every day for the whole of October. Jenny and I did Inktober together. She's an illustrator and graphic designer and I write poetry, so we decided that we would take some of my poetry and she would use the poetry as prompts to create images to go alongside the poetry and kind of give life to the poetry, the little snippets of poetry that I gave her for each day. She has produced some absolutely astounding things and she has really brought my poetry to life. I could not be more impressed or more emotional about what she produced. It's absolutely gorgeous. I'm going to leave her Instagram down below so you can go over and take a look at all of the poetry prompts that I gave to her and then the illustrations that she created for each to kind of breathe life into them. The idea of Jenny creating any kind of deck and having me as a collaborator and just really kind of like putting our heads together and creating something really just thrills me, and honestly you'll be so impressed with this illustration work. It's so beautiful. Have you ever had a spell backfire? Not necessarily in a spectacularly unfortunate way, but I definitely have done spells that I've realized later were a waste of my time and energy because I wasn't focusing on the right thing, you know. And that's one of the things about spellcraft, is that we do end up sometimes looking back with the benefit of hindsight and thinking, you know what, actually I feel like I should have dedicated the time and the energy in this direction rather than putting it in this direction. And we learn over time, you know, what actually works and what we need to place in the center of our focus and what we don't. So for example, I think that I did a lot of what I now refer to as piecemeal spells, piecemeal spellcraft. So I had a problem and I solved that problem with a spell. I came across a challenge and I did a spell to help me deal with that challenge. But actually then when I started to really get into my self-development and deepen into some of the negative mindsets and cyclical negative patterns that I was displaying, I realized, okay, these problems I've been solving piecemeal with these different spells are part of a larger pattern that is actually in my personality. It's something that's in my conditioning. And then I started to turn the art of spellcraft towards deconditioning myself. So instead of dealing piecemeal with these various different challenges and having them go away or kind of like decrease and then thinking like, oh great, that spell worked or whatever, or it didn't work quite so well or whatever the case may be, instead I started to look at the patterns and the attitudes that I had, the mindsets that I was stuck in, and I started to use spellcraft for deconditioning in itself and for personal alchemy in itself, and that was so much more of a useful thing for me. So I wouldn't say I've had something dramatically backfire. I don't think that I put my attention spellcraft wise in the kinds of areas where things could backfire, to be honest. Like for example, I don't do love spells. I think that kind of shit can backfire. Has anyone seen the craft? I'm only joking. I don't think it necessarily works like that per se, but I think if you start fucking around with other people, that can backfire more. I think if you try and fuck around with other people's will, that can certainly backfire more. I think if you try to get somebody to make a different decision about something or see things a different way, you know, that's where things can start to get a bit more tangled up. I only do spellcraft that I feel like has a very, very low chance of having a super negative effect. But you know, I feel like I definitely shifted the way that I use my energy with spellcraft. So I would never do those piecemeal, bit by bit kinds of spells anymore. I would always ask myself, is this issue part of a larger pattern? Sometimes it's not, and I may throw a spell at it, but I do like to wait and work things out kind of like physically and within consensus reality first on the material plane. So it never really gets to that point because I normally deal with my issues a lot quicker now. So if I've got a problem, I just fucking deal with it in some way. I don't necessarily have to go straight to spellcraft. But if I find that there is a challenge that is ongoing or a cluster of challenges that I'm having an issue with, I will normally ask myself, is this part of a larger pattern? And if it is, then the spellcraft will be geared towards deconditioning or understanding that pattern and doing that deep internal alchemy rather than trying to mess with the external variables in order to get the result that I want for just that one thing, you know? So what I would say is my spellcraft is far more overarching now, and that means that it's way more worth my time and energy now than it used to be. Who is your favourite horror film female leading character? That is a good question. The very first thing that comes into my head is Wendy Torrance, played by Shelley Duvall in The Shining, because I just loved her incredible energy in that film, and I felt every moment of her fear, and I felt it was palpable, it's tangible, that fear. And I loved her endless screaming and everything. I know that Stephen King did not like the way Stanley Kubrick interpreted that novel. I know that he did not like the way Stanley Kubrick reinterpreted the character of Wendy Torrance. Apparently in Stephen King's novel, the wife, Wendy Torrance, was not supposed to be this screaming, terrified wreck. She was a very, very sort of tough cookie, and she took matters in hand. I've actually never read The Shining, and I'm to understand that Stephen King really did not like Stanley Kubrick's interpretation, but I thought that Shelley Duvall did an amazing job in that role, and I was just rooting for her the whole time. And I know that if I was in that kind of situation, I would do what needed to be done to protect me and my son, but I would be screaming blue murder the whole time. I would be shit terrified, and I would definitely be making a lot of noise, because I'm never making a lot of noise unless I'm asleep or when I'm dead, and those are the only two times. So I really related to Shelley Duvall's interpretation of Wendy Torrance. I loved it. I've heard that Stanley Kubrick, though, did engage her in some really unethical forms of sort of interaction to get those responses from her, much like I've heard about the director for The Exorcist, who actually was really harsh with Ellen Burstyn, who played the mother of Reagan. Now I must say, Ellen Burstyn and also Linda Blair, I think is her name, who played Reagan in The Exorcist, they're also incredible female characters from horror, and I love The Exorcist. I also obviously want to mention Ripley, played by Sigourney Weaver in the Alien films. I mean, who doesn't adore her? Who doesn't want to be her? Who doesn't get life from Sigourney Weaver as Ripley in the Alien films? Is it ever not cool to just go 100% intuition with spells? I have a hunch about using some ancestral grave dirt in some spells for healing my ancestral line, but I have no knowledge or skill in things like necromancy. Do you use caution when doing what some might think are creepier things, or just go for it? To me, you've actually sort of answered your own question in a way, because you've said, do I need to practice caution when doing what some might think are creepier things? I think the question here for me would be, do I think it's a creepy thing? Do I feel like it's wrong? Do I feel like I need to practice caution? Do I feel like I need to engage with my intuition to figure out whether or not this is a good idea? And to be completely honest with you, that to me is what really matters most of all. It's not about somebody else's perception. When it comes to using grave dirt, I've seen a lot of videos online, I've read a lot of things that come from witches that have experience with using grave dirt. Some of them are really gung-ho about it. They tell you about about, you know, how to go and obtain it in a respectful manner, and how to use it and how to be safe and everything else. Other witches are a lot more sort of extreme and kind of alarmist about their approach, making sure that you are, you know, they're telling you that you need to make sure you're a very practiced witch, a very long-term practitioner before you do anything with working with the dead or working with grave dirt or anything like that. Some people are very hard line, and some people say it's my opinion, it's just my opinion. For me, it's just my opinion kind of bitch, right? So for me, I tend to feel that everybody's got to go with what's right for them. I am not going to be convinced to be scared of using ancestral grave dirt because there's a witch somewhere that says that I should be afraid of it, and that it's very, very high risk, and that it could go wrong very easily, and that I better make sure that I'm practiced, and I better make sure that I'm, you know, basically Crowley before I get started. I'm not going to let someone convince me that that is the case. I'm going to feel into what is right for me, and if I feel like it's something that I can do, and maybe I don't even feel like it is a creepy thing to do, maybe I feel like it's a totally normal thing to do and it makes sense, then I'm going to do it. And what somebody else's opinion is, you know, should not be the be all and end all of whether or not I choose to do a particular spell. It sounds to me like you've logically figured out in your head that if you want to do healing work based on your ancestral line, then it makes sense to use dirt from your ancestral graves. And to me, that also makes sense. That also seems like something that I'm like, yeah, you know, that makes sense. That's something that I would consider too. So I would definitely think about whether or not you think it's creepy. So I kind of feel like within the question, you already have the answer. It's whether or not you think it's creepy. Never mind what someone to the left of you says or to the right of you says. I'm not saying that we shouldn't listen to people who've been in the craft longer, and I'm not saying that experience doesn't count for anything, but what I am saying is that if something just feels normal and natural to you, if you feel that it's going to be totally safe, you don't have really any fear around it, and it's really other people that are placing those fears into your head, I think that's something that you need to take into account as an individual practitioner. How do you get over a fear of starting shadow work or ancestor work, especially with a fundamentalist upbringing? My brain is worried about evil spirits and hell and whatnot. I made a video at the beginning of this month about dealing with the fear that comes from being indoctrinated into Christian fundamentalism, or kind of being influenced by Christian dogma. And in that video, I think what I was attempting to convey at a certain point was that you can really, really get over these things, but it doesn't happen overnight. And you do have to kind of keep telling yourself that there's a reason that the dogma that you laboured under and that you were surrounded by in your upbringing was so compelling and did feel so convincing and real. And you have to kind of understand that you were put through a certain form of brainwashing in order for you to believe these things that have absolutely no basis in fact whatsoever. And you kind of have to keep telling yourself that. You have to keep coming back to that realization. It's not easy, and it's definitely not going to give you super quick results. Obviously there's a process that I think everybody needs to go through, but I just want to assure you for the record that I have come across a lot of people on my spiritual journey and my journey with making content on YouTube who once upon a time were absolutely psycho-spiritually paralyzed by the idea of doing shadow work, ancestor work, spells, any of that kind of thing, and they've come to this point where they can do those things comfortably and they feel okay with it. So I just want to assure you that there are so many people who start out feeling that they are absolutely incapable of moving into any practice or concept which they once were taught was evil, and they do get there in the end. It's kind of about sort of gently loosening the grip that this kind of dogma has over your human mind, and it's about understanding that there's a reason that that dogma is so unbelievably potent and powerful. It's supposed to be. It's not a mistake. It's supposed to make you feel like you're in handcuffs somewhat, you know. Try and remember that there's loads of different things that you can dive into that you might find to be less scary. So you might just want to start, for instance, with like burning a stick of incense. You might want to start with just some deep breathing exercises, or a very simple, sort of very neutral, innocuous guided meditation that you can find online. You might not feel like you can jump straight into something like working with ancestors and that kind of thing. It is possible to start a little bit closer to your comfort zone, so you're still out of your comfort zone, but you're not so out of your comfort zone that you are terrified and you really do feel like something terrible is going to befall you. You can kind of build up to those things that feel more scary, so start small and kind of work outwards from there. Is shadow work okay to do if you have active depression? Look, I can never be even remotely responsible for answering that question for you. It's not something that I can say yay or nay to. do for anyone. You know what, like, shadow work, even as a term, means different things to different people, and I don't have a monopoly on what that term actually means. I think it's graduated way beyond what its initial interpretation or its initial meaning was. We talk about it in different ways, we mean different things when we talk about it, and we're all in very different places on the journey of life. There is no way that I can be the person to ever tell somebody whether or not their active depression should be a barrier to shadow work. But for me personally, as someone who deals with depression myself, I would never be doing active, actual, like, committed shadow work whilst my depression was actually, you know, occurring, while I was having a depressive episode. The last time I had an episode of depression was this February, and I am telling you right now, shadow work was the last thing on my mind. I was thinking about things like basic self-care, making sure that I was not practicing anything that looked like self-neglect, making sure that I was just doing the basic things that I needed to make sure I was physically taken care of, I was hydrated, and that was hard enough, to be honest with you, during the month of February. When depression hits me, I don't have anywhere near the mental and emotional resources to do something like scheduled shadow work. But that's looking at what my definition of shadow work is, and that's looking at my journey with depression, which is all I can really do in answer to your question. I would never presume to be able to tell somebody else what it's appropriate to do when it comes to their mental health journey, but I can say right now for absolute certain, it's not something I would be doing if I was dealing with depression in any kind of active way. I do not have anywhere near the minerals for that kind of thing. I'm far more concerned with getting through the next moment, taking the next action for myself that I need to take, and thinking about how I can make sure that I keep my head above water. What is one of your biggest fears right now? One of my biggest fears, or one of my biggest clusters of fears, I think, at this point in my life, revolves around the mental and emotional well-being and stability of some of the people that I love most and who are closest to me. And it's just worrying about, you know, how stable those people really are, if they're okay, what I can do to help them, and ultimately whether or not they are in danger. You know, I often have fears about that, about whether or not they're in danger of not being able to help themselves, and maybe one of us not being there for them at the right time. And I think a lot of people can probably relate to this on some level, and that is somewhat of a fear for me that I find comes to the forefront of my mind quite often. So there's a lot of people asking me what I think about reincarnation, what I think about the afterlife, and there's also a lot of people in these comments asking me what I think about ghosts, what I think about spirits, and how I would explain those things. Obviously everybody has their own theories, and none of those theories, I don't feel, can actually be backed up in any truly scientific way. I feel like people come across their different theories about the afterlife and ghosts and stuff through their own experiences, through things that they read, through conversations that they have, where they have a sort of like a sort of revelation, and they're like, yeah, I think that's pretty much how it goes down. And I'm no different. I have my own feelings and my own theories, but I'm definitely not trying to put any of those things across as fact. So what I would say, just very briefly, is that I do believe that energy doesn't die, it just transfers into something else. I believe that the life force that's inhabiting me could very well transfer into another human body, or it could transfer into a seedling and turn into a tree, or it could transfer into any number of various different things. I believe that some of the memories that we have of past lives could potentially be something to do with the blueprint within the energy source that inhabits us now, not necessarily being totally recycled completely, still hanging on to, let's say, particles of the memories of the being that life force inhabited before. So let's say if somebody just keeps having memories that they're a 5-year-old boy in another time, in another like era, civilization or whatever, it could very well be that the life force that's inhabiting that particular person, the energy that's animating their body, once belonged to a boy in that situation. And you're getting almost that memory recall coming through, that trace of that blueprint coming through. It's almost a little bit like when somebody has an arm, like a sort of somebody else's arm put onto them, so a limb transplant, right? And there are lots and lots of stories that people tell about having somebody else's arm placed onto them and then getting the memories of that person that used to own that arm. And to me, I feel like the soul, if you like, the life force can be very similar. So I feel like that is potentially what happens, and that's as much as I think about reincarnation, essentially, in terms of what happens to my energy, what happens to the spirit that animates me. Now, what I think about ghosts that could be going on when we like step into a room and there's something ungroovy going on in the room, or you're clearly having interactions with a being that once inhabited a human form and it wants to talk to you, or you're having interactions with it. I feel like what could definitely be happening there is that for some reason that life force did not go into the next thing. That life force is hanging around, it's trapped somehow, and I definitely believe that could be the case. So that's the kind of thing that I kind of think about ghosts. I feel like we can reconnect with those who have passed on into another sort of like body, or another energetic situation, or another energetic sphere, but I don't necessarily feel like those people are always ghosts. I feel like a ghost for me, like my definition of ghost, is much more to do with an energy that is trapped, an energy that needs to get free, or that the energy hasn't recycled into something else, and that energy is still inhabiting the ego and the thought processes and the memories of the person that last died. So that energy has not actually moved on into its recycle, if you will. Whereas I feel like there are people that I've known in my life who have passed on, who are not with me anymore, and I feel like I do interact with them and I do connect with them, but it's not because they're ghosts, it's because the spark of divinity that resided inside them is the same spark of divinity that resides within everything else. So if I see a flourishing tree with a strong gust of wind going through it, and I feel like that gust of wind sounds like the voice of a family member of mine who's passed on, and I feel suddenly like they're with me, they're at my shoulder, and I feel like, wow, like they're actually with me in this moment. I mean, yeah, they are with me in this moment. They absolutely are. They're part of it. They were always part of it. They were made up of the same stuff as that tree. So when I feel like I'm being visited by someone who's died, by someone who's passed on, I am being visited by them, you know? So that's what makes sense to me. I hope that makes sense to some of you guys. Are there any dark gods or goddesses or dark archetypes that you would like to work with in the future? Hell fucking yes. Oh my gosh, so many. I really feel like there's probably a whole host of different dark archetypes and dark deities that I hope are going to come across my path, or that I will hope to get better acquainted with. I actually have a long-standing love affair with the idea of connecting with Lucifer, actually, and I think that would be something that I definitely wouldn't say no to. I love the idea of working with demons. There are so many dark goddesses or darker kinds of goddesses that I hope will come across my path. I would love to have some encounters with Lilith. I would love to say hi to Hecate, you know, that kind of thing. So yeah, there's so many. I would also love to learn more about and potentially have some experiences with the Mahavidyas, the 10 aspects of the Adi Parashakti in Hinduism. Those 10 aspects are fascinating to me. Those parts of the divine feminine and just those energies and those names, they seem to hold so much power, and I'd love to at least learn more about them. You know, if I never actually attempted to approach or to connect, that would be okay, but just to research so much more and go so much more deeply. Someone here is asking me about pet veneration and whether or not I do it, and whether or not it's part of my Samhain experience. I definitely have lost pets. I lost a pet really in a super sad way in 2015. It was so gutting and really affected me. We'd had that pet for so long. He was our family cat since I was 17. So yeah, it was painful and it hurt a lot, and it really helped me connecting with him during Samhain since then, and whenever the fancy takes me, really. So yeah, pet veneration and connecting with our pets, I feel like that's something that is so important for so many people and helps us to reconnect back with all the amazing memories that those animals gave us, and just really let them know that they're still loved and they're still cared for. Honouring our pets is just as important, I think, as honouring our human family members and loved ones. Maybe that's just the vegan in me, but that's how I feel. Have you ever worked with Santa Muerte or looked into anything of her? I was wondering if she's ever come to you or sparked any interest for you. Yes, she definitely sparks an interest for me. I have a very healthy level of respect for Santissima Muerte, and I am transfixed by her. The very moment that I learned about her, and I learned about, you know, how people relate to her, the offerings that they give her, how the Catholic Church in Mexico feels about her, and started looking into, you know, the potential origins of this incredible archetypal force. I was very affectionate towards her from that moment. I've never sought an interaction with her. I've never sought to work with her. I feel like the divine feminine archetypes that I work with are probably more wholly appropriate for me in terms of my cultural understanding and in terms of where I am now in my development. And I want to be very careful. I would want to tread very carefully to add another goddess in, especially if I felt like there were some ethical scruples for me on any level. And you know what? I kind of want to return to this topic in another video, because I feel like people got a very hard line attitude from me when I put out my cultural appropriation video. I'm not trying to say that we have to put the genie completely back in the bottle and we can never ever look at anything that doesn't come from our own culture. But to me, there's a big difference between respecting an archetype, allowing it to inspire me, connecting with it and learning about it, versus actually engaging with it, interacting with it, and making it into a part of my practice. And I draw a very firm line there with that particular goddess. But Jiminy Christmas, she does something to me, not only just the image of her, but everything I've ever learned about her. Yeah, I really, if she was to walk in while I was sat at my psycho-spiritual table one evening, I would get the fuck up and offer her a seat. And I would say, can I make you a tequila, a slammer, salt, lemon and lime time? What is your understanding of demonology? Why would somebody work with them? I've come across vlogs on YouTube and I've always wondered why some people are attracted to working with them. The only experience I've had with them is through the lens of Christianity, hence I have a very limited perspective. I'm interested in hearing your take on it, as there are a lot of mixed views out there. You know what? I have some books that basically explain the ins and outs of the various different demons and kind of help you to understand more about demonology and how to work effectively with demons. It's not something that I've really put a hell of a lot of time into so far on my journey, but it definitely does appeal to me. Obviously, I do not come from anywhere near the Christian paradigm in terms of the teachings that I've absorbed through my life. I come from a Catholic background, and I did have an awareness of the devil, but it was never really spoken about overtly, and it certainly wasn't something that was used for fear-mongering, I don't think, with any of the kids in my family that were more explicitly raised Catholic, that did go through confirmation and all that jazz. I never had a fear of the devil in my whole entire life, but I totally understand where that fear of the devil comes from, and I can understand why that propaganda is incredibly convincing, particularly when it goes in from a very young age, right? But to me, I see the idea of demons and working with demons as just opening up this incredible, intricate chocolate box of different archetypal forces and energies that reflect different parts of the shadow. And I kind of look at the idea of getting into demonology as somewhat on a par with working with the Qliphoth, the inverted tree of life, sort of mixed with having an incredible set of like hero servitors in a way that will not only help you but will also teach you and will kind of break you down to build you up. But obviously that's my paradigm, and that's definitely the paradigm that I'm sticking with. I'm just really not into fear-mongering. I'm not here for the fear-mongering. If somebody was to show up in the comments section and say, ha ha ha, little girl, thinking you can play with demons, they'll fuck your life up and hand your heart to you on a plate, I would just read that and be like, all right, mate, whatever. I wouldn't approach anything spiritual or otherwise with a shit ton of fear in my heart, though. That's the thing about me. I know that my fear is a deep instinct, you know. I can tell the difference between a fear that just comes from, you know, fear of failure or fear of success or fear of embarrassment versus that primal fear that I know comes from a place of my spirit telling me, don't do that, don't touch that, don't be with that person, don't ingest that substance, don't work with these things. And to me, like, if that fear wasn't there, I would work with fucking anything, because to me, I just believe that my belief is really the crux of the issue. So if I believe that something is going to harm me, that it is going to entangle me in badness that I don't want anything to do with, that it's going to fuck up my life, I definitely will not head in the direction of that thing, because I feel like belief creates a self-fulfilling prophecy. If I believe that that is what's going to happen, it is far more likely to happen than if I feel like, wow, this is going to be really enriching. and it's going to be challenging, but it's going to be something that I know I need in order to break through to that next level and to get to that next plateau. I feel like if I walk in there with that belief, that very much shapes and defines the experience that I have under the umbrella of that belief, and that is what I've experienced the entire time I've done anything spiritual or magical in nature. So that's what I'm going to stick with. So I suppose the answer to your question is I have not messed around with relationships with demons. I have not sought to interact with demons, but I find demons extremely interesting, and I'm very interested in people who do work with them and have something to teach on them. And I definitely can see myself diving into video resources and further book resources and stuff in the future and trying to have my own adventures. For now, it doesn't call to me, but it's certainly not off the table entirely. Do you think it's possible to connect with a dead ancestor to achieve closure in the morning of their death? And if so, how would you go about it? I'm not necessarily thinking of connecting in the sense of I expect a verbal answer via a Ouija board. I find it hard to come to terms with the passing of my family member 1.5 years later. It's like I'm stuck. Okay, you know, to me, I feel like people connect with those who have passed on all the time in various different ways. I think it can be incredibly helpful. I think that it's clear that you have your own ideas about what that would look like and how you would go about doing it, so I'm not going to give you any hard and fast suggestions for how it ought to be done, but certainly people connect with their loved ones all the time. They light candles, they pay tribute, they talk to their loved ones, they ask their loved ones for signs, they do all kinds of things that bring immense comfort and immense sense of release, especially when they're dealing with feeling like they're in shock, they still can't believe it, you know, so it is very helpful. I feel like when we get into the business of going to somebody who claims that they have a specific gift of working with the dead, and we visit them frequently and give them money to contact the dead relative for us, that's where it can become problematic. I feel like there are a lot of people abusing that kind of power and that kind of suggestive state that a person can be in when they are grieving. So, you know, with your question, it seems like you want to do this for yourself. You feel like this is something that's going to bring closure to you, and I feel like it could well bring closure to you. And if you're asking me whether or not I believe we can do that, or whether or not I believe it's nurturing, I totally believe we can do that, and I totally believe that it's nurturing. I've met people who feel like somebody is with them, you know, 20-30 years after they've died, and that they still feel like there's a connection there. I don't think there's anything wrong with that at all. I think those etheric cords can still be incredibly strong, and I feel like people leave clusters and associations of energetic material all over the place when they go, and we can still access that. We can access that through continuing to enjoy things that they enjoyed in their life and just being around things that were joyful to them. We can do that by wearing their clothes, wearing their jewelry. We can do that by having pictures of them up, honouring them every Samhain, talking to them, communing with them in whatever fashion we feel is appropriate for our particular spiritual practice. But I would just say that I do feel like when we get into the territory of going to someone who speaks to the dead, that can be abused. I'm not saying by any means that all practitioners abuse it, but some do, and I've seen that happen. And I do think that we can keep ourselves in an infantilized state when it comes to communing with our dead loved ones, where we are not ready to accept that they actually are physically dead, and that we will not see them again in physical form in this lifetime. And I feel like that shock and that agony and that unwillingness or incapability to move on can really line the pockets of people who are really profiting from somebody's extended pain. And rather than actually trying to help that person to heal and trying to help that person to release, they are wanting that person to remain within that custodial sentence of grief and pain. And that isn't right. So we need to make sure we avoid people like that. What brings a smile to your heart this Samhain and Halloween? Oh, that's a really cute question. These glasses bring a smile to my heart. These witchy fingers bring a smile to my heart. My new altar setup brings a smile to my heart. Really just connecting with other witches online brings a smile to my heart, because I'm super solitary in my own life. I don't go to group rituals or anything like that. I don't have a coven. But just connecting with people and understanding what's going on for them this Samhain and Halloween and what their thoughts are has been amazing. I have really really enjoyed a particular video by Shadow Harvest that is just amazing. I'll leave it below. It's a beautiful poem called The Veil is Thin, and it's an incredible art piece where she's used lots of different bits of footage and just brought them together in this incredibly lovely way. Very beautiful. So I definitely will link that down below. That has put a massive smile on my face and in my heart this Samhain. Do you use or explore fear in a ritual or creative way? If you do, is it specifically around Samhain? I've actually explored fear in a number of different ways in my rituals. I actually really like to get to a point sometimes with my self-exploration, my shadow work, and also my connection with deity sometimes, where I'm actually afraid, where I place myself into a state of fear. And it's something that's very consciously done, and it's something that I definitely feel that I've kind of worked with in a more and more sophisticated way over time. The very first thing that I did to explore fear in a ritual context was when I was exploring my fear of the dark. My fear of the dark has been something that I've been super interested in for a very long time. I think that it explains a lot about my character. I think that it explains a lot about my past and my mental health issues in the past. It's very much an interesting part, I think, of my identity. And I've often tried to break my fear of the dark and, you know, really kind of just dissolve it. But I've also been interested in how it can work when it comes to me being more suggestible, experiencing the transpersonal through being in the darkness and seeing things and witnessing things and feeling things that are not there in any material or physical way. So I've always had this love-hate relationship, I think, during my magical and spiritual life with the fact that I am afraid of the dark. So I've used it to my advantage. I've tried to break it down, examine it and get past it, but I've also seen that it can be very useful. We can scry into the darkness, you know. We can allow ourselves to be more open and susceptible to information and guidance which is beyond the cognitive when we are in the darkness. And it's also very important, I think, to look at and understand the psychology of fear of the dark. And how that might be a very important part of our personal story. And I think it is an important part of my personal story. So that's one of the main ways that I've played with fear. I have also listened to some pretty scary music while I've been doing closed eye journeying. And I've definitely journeyed in ways that have scared me. Like I have totally journeyed into my death process. I have envisioned my breath leaving my lungs, my eyes sinking into my head, my body decomposing, my spirit rising above and just watching me decompose and rot. And that is very valuable to me. There's something very medicinal about that, but it also is shit scary, and sometimes I have definitely sweated one out while I've been there imagining that. But it's very important for me. It's important for my ability to let things go. It's important for my ability to have perspective and come back to center. Death meditations are among the most powerful for me, but of course they are scary. They are tapping into one of the key human fears, which is the fear of our demise. So I hope that answers your question. There's lots of other things I could say about using fear in the psycho-spiritual journey and in the magical and ritual journey. But, you know, to answer your question just for now, it definitely has helped. And I feel like fear can open me up to things I may not otherwise have recognised or tapped into that I really needed on some level. What was your scariest experience ever? I think that experiencing psychosis was probably the scariest thing that I ever went through. I think that there were a lot of parts of my mental health breakdown and my difficulties with mental well-being that were scary, but I think the scariest was the psychosis aspect of it, for sure. Also, I had a near-death experience once where I nearly drowned, and had it not been for a very vigilant friend who turned around at the right time and saw that I was struggling, I definitely would have drowned. I was not the strongest swimmer, and I had jumped in and tried to swim across to the central island in the middle of a reservoir where my friends were with some very heavy jeans on, and it hadn't occurred to me to take them off, and I was not very good at treading water. So as I realised the jeans were dragging me down, I was trying to untie these jeans, but I couldn't tread water, and my head kept going under the water, and I was panicking, doll faces. I was kicking, I was flailing, I was choking on this water. It was really frightening me. but my desire to live is super strong, and I was like slapping and splashing the surface of the water. But fortunately this vigilant friend came along, and it was like something from a, you know, those stories you hear about dolphins like taking you and saving you. It was kind of like that. She just like lifted me as though I weighed nothing, and like she took me in a position that you're supposed to take somebody in if they're struggling and you're like saving them. So she used her whole chest to push my chest out of the water so I could breathe, and she just kicked back until we got to the shore. And oh my good goddess, it was so scary. So that was scary. I also had a sketchy experience which I don't necessarily fully want to go into right now, but let's just say that it involves some guys with guns in a forest, and I definitely think that that could have gone a lot worse than it did go. I don't want you to panic, nothing bad happened to me, but I really feel like something bad could have, and I often replay that moment in my head, and I go for like history and the subjunctive, where I think about all the different ways that it could have gone if I hadn't have thought very quickly, and if there hadn't also have been a man there who undoubtedly saved me from getting into real trouble. What are your thoughts on magic through beauty and style? I have a lot of thoughts on that kind of thing. I may create a separate resource for that. I do think of myself as somewhat of a style witch. I definitely believe in enclothed cognition. I believe in dressing for the thing that I'm trying to achieve, dressing for the job that I'm trying to do. I believe that that kind of thing is very, very powerful, very emotive, extremely potent for me, and it always has been. I have changed almost at a cellular level when I've put on a dress or put on a piece of jewellery. Something about it is extremely transformative for me, and it gets me very quickly into the headspace that I need to be in. And I feel like a lot of people can relate to that kind of thing. A lot of people also can't relate to that kind of thing, and that's totally fine. But for me, I feel like it's really so potent, you know, the way that I choose to dress, the colours I choose to wear, the things I choose to convey to the world, and also the way that I choose to make myself feel through what I put on is very potent, and there's definitely a magical quality to it without any doubt whatsoever in my mind. I definitely think beautifying yourself, making yourself feel glamorous, making yourself feel sexy or empowered or matchless or untouchable, all of those things can be achieved through how you choose to dress, obviously. But I also think we can play with other things when it comes to clothing. Like, we can actually dress in ways that don't reflect us at all. We can go totally out of the box and dress in a way that normally would represent the kind of person that we didn't want to be. And we can play with that and see how that helps us to decondition our ego, and it helps us to stand apart from our own identity and our own beliefs. And that can be very, very powerful and very useful when we're doing magic, because sometimes we need to be able to utilize a magical practice or an idea that doesn't really go along with who we really feel we are, usually in our ego, right? So we need to be able to decondition ourselves. We need to be able to step aside from the identity that we've created for ourselves, that we're so precious about, that means so much to us, so we can really get to the business of trying things that we wouldn't normally have in our paradigm. And sometimes it's important to be able to go out of the box with magical practice and be able to do that. So sometimes dressing completely differently, like if I was to dress, for example, in like, I don't know, a fucking terry towel rockaware tracksuit with bling and stuff like that, and I don't know, got extensions and like very intense acrylic nails, and walked in a different way and had myself like a designer Louis Vuitton or whatever, I would feel very different, and I would feel very fucking weird, because that's not how I dress. That's not the lifestyle that I'm a part of. That's not really got much to do with the culture that I'm a part of. So it would be an interesting thing. It would take me out of my very, very defined, very precious sense of who I am as a human being, and that is very useful magically, and it's a way to train our brains to be better witches and magicians. How do you connect better with death when you're scared of it? To me, you know, death is such an inevitable thing that if I allowed myself to be too terribly afraid of it, it would really impact the quality of my life, and it would start to get massively in the way, and I would start to feel all of this very strong anxiety coming up around it, and I would obsess over it, and it would take up a lot of my time and a lot of my mental capacity. And I know that that does happen for a lot of people who are actually so afraid of death, and I'm not saying that that's the situation of the person that asked me this question, but it does happen, of course, that people do become preoccupied thinking about the manner of their death, when they're going to die, worrying about other people in their life dying. And I'm not saying that I don't go through that. I definitely have those moments where I have felt really afraid, genuinely afraid of losing someone that I love to death, or going myself ahead of time and leaving the people close to me bereft and bewildered, you know. That does scare me. But what really what really helped me so much was recognizing that it is absolutely inevitable. So we have to find a way to rub along with it in life. And the other thing that helped me so much was slowly starting to realize, and I had a number of different experiences that I think helped me to realize this, that death is the meaning of life. That's how I see it. I feel that so much of the thrill of life and the intensity of life and all of the things that I find to be so beautiful about life, the transpersonal experiences, the deep interpersonal connections, etc., that stuff would just be nowhere near as good if I was immortal. It's the idea that I'm mortal that gives me that feeling of that incredible urgency to grab onto life. I don't know if there's anyone in my audience who's watched Battlestar Galactica, but there's a race, a robot alien race in Battlestar Galactica called the Cylons, and they figure this out. There's a certain point in the series, and I don't want to give too much away, but the Cylons are essentially immortal. If you kill them, they just download in a pod, and they can do that over and over again. So they don't actually encounter death in their race. They just keep downloading. And what they come to recognize is that the humans that they are fighting have a gift, the gift of death, and because they can die, it makes them really enjoy life so much more and appreciate every moment, and it helps them to feel love and create great art and really take the experience of being alive in this existence to the heights that they can take it to. And the Cylons realise that they actually want to get hold of the human DNA so they themselves can come to expire, so that they don't just download over and over again, but they actually get to experience death themselves, so they can experience the urgency and the majesty that comes from living a life that is temporary. And that's just one of those great things that I think I've come to peace with in my mind, that has made death a lot less scary. However, I do definitely look at people with a little bit of a squinty eye when they say that they're not afraid of death at all, and they're not afraid of losing anyone at all, and they don't believe in death in any way. Like, they believe, oh, you know, if my kid or my husband or whatever dies tomorrow, I know I'll still be able to talk to them, and I know they'll still be there, so I'm not afraid of death at all. Nah, you know what, I think that's a little bit bypassy to me. That feels a bit spiritually bypassy. And I always look at those people and think, there's not that many of them around, but whenever I read anything like that online, I always think, you must be a little bit fucking scared of death. Come on now, come on now. Pumpkins, that is the end of my Samhain and Halloween Q&A. I hope you had a very spooky, witchy time here. Thank you so much for all the questions that were given to me on Instagram. I really, really appreciate you guys wanting to know anything at all about my practice, to be completely honest. It's been really lovely to be able to answer these questions. Have a spooky one for the rest of the time, guys. So much love and blessed be. Mwah.